Franklin wrote in his diary, "I am amazed. A small exercise adds years to life." Benjamin Franklin is often remembered for his inventions, his contributions to the founding of the United States, and his endless curiosity. Yet behind the iconic kite and key experiment, the printing press, and the philosophical musings, there was a man deeply fascinated by physical well-being. In his diary, we find traces of a surprising revelation that he believed prolonged not just his own life, but could potentially extend anyone's if adopted sincerely. This story will follow Franklin from the bustling streets of 18th century Philadelphia to the quiet corners of his study, where he recorded daily insights. By the end, an unexpected twist will unfold, one that might forever change how you think about simple routines. From childhood, Franklin displayed boundless energy. Born in Boston in 1706, he was the 15th of 17 children. In such a large family, resources were scarce and discipline was often strict. Franklin's father, Josiah, made soap and candles, while his mother, Abia, managed the household. Even as a young boy, Benjamin showed remarkable curiosity, devouring any book he could lay hands on. He also spent hours exploring the city's narrow streets, watching ships come into the harbor, listening to sailors' stories, and absorbing every bit of knowledge that crossed his path. But his early life was not confined to quiet learning. Benjamin soon discovered he had a passion for physical movement. While not a trained athlete by modern standards, he enjoyed walking and swimming. As a teenager, he famously made homemade paddles to improve his strokes while swimming in the Charles River, turning the simple act of paddling around into a small scientific experiment to see if he could move more efficiently. Some might call this a sign of his budding scientific genius, but it was also a testament to his enjoyment of keeping his body active. Before we continue with Franklin's story, it is worth noting that 18th century life in the American colonies was physically demanding by default. People walked long distances daily, carried water from wells, chopped wood, and performed other manual tasks. Yet Franklin believed there was a deliberate kind of exercise one could undertake, a small but focused activity that went beyond the chores of survival. He began recording his reflections on this idea in various scraps of paper and personal diaries. In his teenage years, Franklin was apprenticed to his older brother James, a printer. The printing trade was labor-intensive. One had to lift heavy trays of lead type, operate the presses, and stand for long hours. Franklin, already physically fit from his swimming adventures, adapted well, but he also recognized that many of his fellow apprentices fell prey to exhaustion or back problems. He would later write that a bit of daily stretch and motion kept him alert and reduced his fatigue. This became one of the first inklings of the principle he would wholeheartedly embrace later in life. As he grew older, Franklin adopted a lifelong habit of introspection. He devised charts to track his virtues and sought to improve his character through daily self-examination. This method extended to his physical health. In the mornings, he liked to open his window and let fresh air fill his room, part of what he called air baths. He believed fresh air strengthened the body, cleared the mind, and prepared him for the day's work. Alongside these air baths, he would engage in simple calisthenics, light movements to get blood flowing. On occasion, he also performed more strenuous workouts, such as lifting light weights or practicing certain gymnastics of his own invention. These exercises were not recognized as formal training regimes of modern fitness culture, but they were Franklin's attempts to systematically challenge his muscles and promote circulation. He believed that even a short 10-minute session could yield benefits. The crucial element, in his view, was consistency. Philadelphia in the mid-18th century was a growing hub of commerce and culture. Horse-drawn carts rattled along cobblestone streets. Merchants hawked wares, and print shops like Franklin's churned out newspapers and pamphlets. Franklin's days were full, often dominated by business meetings, print orders, writing, or civic projects. Yet he made time for his small exercise, as he sometimes called it, which usually took place in the early morning or late evening. He saw this habit not as an indulgence, but as an investment in his long-term productivity and well-being. At 20, Franklin traveled to London to refine his printing skills. During his stay, he marveled at the city's pace of life, its diversity, and the wealth of books available. But he also noticed something else. Many of the artisans and workers he met seemed physically spent at the end of each day, complaining of aches and pains that grew more severe with age. In one of his letters home, Franklin observed that a degree of daily motion might offset these degenerations, lamenting that most laborers did not consider such motion beyond their grueling tasks. This observation became a building block in his emerging philosophy about physical activity. Returning to Philadelphia, Franklin plunged into various ventures. He opened his own print shop, launched the Pennsylvania Gazette, and later founded civic institutions like the First Public Library and the Union Fire Company. His schedule was busier than ever, but he remained committed to his daily exercise routine. It was during these years that he began more faithfully recording his thoughts in diaries. One entry read, "It astounds me how, after only a short practice of stretching and flexing, the mind brightens and the body feels anew." Franklin's curiosity drove him to test how different forms of movement affected his energy. He would go on brisk walks around the city's perimeter, sometimes pushing into the countryside. He also experimented with electric baths, a quirky method that involved mild electrical stimulation of muscles. Though he soon concluded that while intriguing, it was less beneficial than good old-fashioned physical exertion. He noticed tangible results. His posture improved, and he rarely fell ill despite the era's prevalence of diseases. When fevers or colds did strike, he felt he recovered more quickly than his friends. He grew convinced that the body's natural defenses were stronger when supported by regular movement. In his diary, he wrote, "Though not a physician, I see plainly how the body endures better when its fibers are daily awakened." Before we move forward, here is a question for you to think about and perhaps answer in the comments. Do you have a small exercise habit or daily movement ritual that refreshes you, even if it is just a few minutes of stretching or walking? If so, how does it make you feel afterward? As the American colonies drifted toward revolution, Franklin took on roles that demanded much travel and negotiation. He sailed across the Atlantic multiple times, spending months away from home. On ships, he faced cramped quarters and limited space for physical activity. Undeterred, he fashioned makeshift routines, such as walking laps on deck, when the weather permitted, or doing simple resistance exercises in his cabin. He believed these improvised workouts sustained his vigor through long, grueling voyages. During his tenure in London as a colonial representative, Franklin's diaries reflect his continuing devotion to the principle of daily movement. He mentions strolling through gardens, visiting bathhouses for relaxation, and even engaging in playful physical games at social gatherings. He noticed that many high society individuals led sedentary lifestyles, dining on rich foods and indulging in alcohol. They often complained of gout, obesity, and other ailments that Franklin was convinced could be mitigated by consistent mild exercise. Approaching his 40s and 50s, Franklin maintained a robust schedule, often outpacing men half his age in mental clarity. People would ask him about his secrets. He would sometimes chuckle, referencing a balanced diet, moderation in alcohol, a structured day, and keeping the blood in motion. While he did not elaborate publicly as much as he did in private diaries, he quietly evangelized the idea to friends. Meanwhile, his experiments with electricity and his passionate involvement in civic improvement overshadowed this quieter passion for exercise. Yet he returned to the topic in letters, especially to close confidants. In one letter to his friend, Cadwallader Colden, Franklin wrote that even 15 minutes of vigorous bodily exertion each day seemed to offset the wear and tear of long hours at the printing press or desk. As political tensions flared in the 1770s, Franklin became a central figure in diplomacy, traveling to France to secure vital alliances for the revolutionary cause. Despite the whirlwind of political negotiations, banquets, and social obligations, he kept up some version of his exercise routine. Accounts from French admirers mention that Franklin was fond of walking in the early mornings along the gardens of Passy, enjoying the crisp air and occasionally doing light stretches. These seemingly small habits provided a sense of stability during tumultuous times. When he returned to America, older but still vital, Franklin stepped into the role of elder statesman. He participated in the Constitutional Convention and guided younger leaders. Observers noted his sharp intellect and calm demeanor, qualities Franklin attributed in part to maintaining a sound body. Even well into his 70s, he would remind people that motion is life, a phrase that appears in scattered notes. Then, in the final stretch of his life, Franklin's diaries reveal an even deeper conviction. He wrote down a series of reflections that read almost like confessions. One entry stated, "I am truly astonished to find that through the simple practice of daily bodily exertion, one may extend the vigor of youth." His personal health challenges, including gout and kidney stones, became more frequent, but he still believed that these ailments would have been far worse if he had not fostered his body's resilience over the decades. By the time he penned the phrase, "I am amazed, a small exercise adds years to life," Franklin had accumulated a lifetime of firsthand experience. Though he acknowledged that no one could live forever, he saw that moderate, consistent physical activity could help maintain clarity of mind, energy, and a general sense of well-being. It was not about strenuous athletics. Franklin never advocated that everyone become a competitive swimmer or long-distance runner. Rather, he urged people to find a manageable routine they could integrate into daily life. So what is the surprising twist? In many histories, Franklin's scientific endeavors overshadow this aspect of his personal philosophy. But if you read the diaries closely, there is a hint that Franklin believed physical activity did more than preserve the body. He suspected it fortified the spirit. He noticed that whenever he felt anxious or depressed, a brisk walk could shift his mood, granting him renewed perspective. In a late diary entry, he wrote, "The body is not a mere carriage for the mind, but its companion. Keeping them both in good cheer is no small triumph." This line points us toward the deeper significance of Franklin's approach. Far from viewing exercise as a chore or punishment, he saw it as a path to mental and emotional equanimity. The diary suggests he might even have anticipated modern research on how physical movement can regulate mood, reduce anxiety, and improve overall brain function. Let's consider the broader context. In Franklin's time, medical knowledge was rudimentary by today's standards. Germ theory was not widely accepted, and many believed illness was caused by imbalances in bodily humors or astrological influences. Franklin's perspective was refreshingly practical. While he did not have the scientific vocabulary to describe endorphins or cardiovascular health, he recognized patterns. Consistent moderate exercise seemed to yield lower rates of sickness, a sharper mind, and a more positive outlook. He also believed in balance. He was not an absolutist. His diaries show that he valued rest and enjoyment just as much. Franklin indulged in good food and wine, but in moderation. He worked hard, but also took breaks to reflect or engage in creative leisure. The small exercise sessions fitted neatly into this balanced approach, not so strenuous as to be unsustainable, yet vigorous enough to keep the body limber. Now, you might be thinking, sure, Franklin lived a long time for his era, 84 years, but was that truly remarkable? Given that average life expectancy in the 18th century was far lower, mainly due to high infant mortality and limited medical care, living to your 80s was indeed a notable feat. Franklin attributed his longevity partly to luck, partly to a robust constitution inherited from his parents, and partly, as his diary reveals, to his consistent practice of mindful physical exertion. He also placed emphasis on the social dimension of exercise. Sometimes, he would invite friends for group walks, turning them into strolling conversations or philosophical discussions. He believed that walking outdoors, engaging with nature and with friends, not only boosted physical health, but also expanded the mind. In modern parlance, we might call these walking meetings. Franklin's letters mention how many fruitful ideas emerged during these saunters, with a synergy of movement and dialogue sparked creativity. As the decades passed, Franklin's diaries filled with notes on everything from political negotiations to scientific experiments to personal reflections on virtue. Hidden among these entries, you can find a consistent refrain. Keep moving, keep the body awake, do not let it stagnate. He wrote about how spending an entire day sitting at a desk dulled his senses, whereas short bursts of motion sharpened them. It might be tempting to see Franklin's concept of small exercise as merely historical trivia, overshadowed by grand achievements such as his role in drafting the Declaration of Independence or his experiments with electricity. Yet, if we consider the diaries as a whole, it seems Franklin believed that his simple practice of daily movement was one of the cornerstones supporting all his accomplishments. A healthy body enabled a keen mind, which in turn fueled the intellectual leaps and social innovations he was renowned for. To modern ears, the notion that a small exercise adds years to life may sound familiar, even obvious. We now have volumes of research confirming that regular physical activity reduces the risk of chronic diseases, improves mood, and can extend longevity. But in Franklin's century, such an idea was not widely circulated, nor was it backed by scientific consensus. He arrived at his conclusion through personal trial and observation, placing him once again at the cutting edge of his time. We cannot ignore, of course, that Franklin was far from perfect. He struggled with gout in his later years, a condition that might have been exacerbated by certain indulgences or genetic predispositions. His diaries show moments of frustration when pain flared up, particularly in damp weather. Even then, he believed that moderate movement, tailored to his body's limitations, helped alleviate some symptoms. He admitted he could not rely on strenuous exercise in old age, yet the principle of gentle, consistent movement still proved beneficial. By the end of his life, Franklin settled into a grandfatherly role, dispensing wisdom to younger generations. When people asked him for advice on living well, he had plenty to offer on moral virtues, frugality, and curiosity. But peppered into his counsel was always a mention of physical activity. In one letter to a young acquaintance, he wrote, "Preserve your vigor, and your vigor will preserve you. Each morning, set aside a small allotment of time for the health of your body, that your mind may be the freer to pursue noble aims." So, where does that leave us today? As we reflect on Franklin's diaries and glean the significance of his statement, "I am amazed. A small exercise adds years to life," we see a message that transcends centuries. His experiments with motion, from youthful swimming to gentle stretches in his final decades, demonstrate the enduring human quest to balance intellect, productivity, and physical well-being. Now, here is the second question, which I invite you to answer after you have pondered the entire narrative. Tomorrow morning, what is one small step you can take to add movement to your day, even if it is just for a few minutes? With this question, we circle back to the essence of Franklin's revelation. He did not propose grand transformations or an all-or-nothing approach. Instead, he championed the power of small, consistent efforts over a lifetime. From the vantage point of modern science, his intuition aligns remarkably well with research findings on habit formation, cardiovascular health, and mental clarity. Yet the final twist is this: Franklin's notion of small exercise was never just about muscle and bones. He believed, perhaps more deeply than even he could articulate, that the act of moving with intention connected mind, body, and spirit. His diaries reveal that he saw this as a form of self-respect, a daily affirmation that life was worth engaging fully. He might not have had the language of holistic health, but he lived its principles in a way that resonates across centuries. And so, we return to the diary entry that sparked this tale. Franklin wrote, "I am amazed. A small exercise adds years to life." In that exclamation, he captured both wonder and conviction. It was the voice of a scientist, statesman, philosopher, and above all, a keen observer of the human condition. If we listen closely, we might find ourselves just as amazed, rediscovering the profound in what seems ordinary. A brisk walk, a gentle stretch, or a simple exercise routine repeated day after day, quietly weaving added years, or at least added vitality, into the tapestry of our lives. Franklin's final years were marked by both physical challenges and ongoing intellectual pursuits. He suffered from painful bouts of gout, and kidney stones frequently plagued him. Despite these setbacks, visitors to his Philadelphia home were often surprised to find him engaged in light exercises, sometimes performed in a chair when standing became too painful. Friends described how he would straighten his spine, raise his arms gently, rotate his shoulders, and carefully stretch his legs. Although those motions were modest, Franklin believed they helped him remain alert and relatively agile for a man of advanced age. He wrote in one diary entry that every morning, before dressing, he would thank the body for its service by giving it a deliberate stirring. These short sessions, he insisted, fostered both gratitude and heightened awareness of his bodily condition. If a particular stretch caused him discomfort, he would note that as a signal to rest or consider ways to alleviate the pressure. In a time when medicine was still rudimentary, this self-monitoring offered Franklin a semblance of control over his health. Moreover, Franklin's commitment to small exercise did not exist in isolation. He advocated that people also seek balance in their diets. While he had experimented with vegetarianism in his youth, initially he admitted to save money. He later found that a diet rich in vegetables, fruits, and moderate portions of meat suited him best. He particularly cautioned against excessive consumption of alcohol and sugar, noting how such indulgences left him feeling sluggish and more prone to illness. In old age, Franklin corresponded frequently with younger political figures and intellectuals. These letters contain not only advice on governance and diplomacy, but also simple health tips gleaned from his decades of experimentation. One particularly telling letter to a young John Quincy Adams includes a postscript in which Franklin wrote, "Permit me the liberty to suggest that a small daily bodily exertion can fortify both your frame and your temper. Indeed, I find the latter is especially improved by a brisk walk in fresh air." As Franklin neared the end of his life, he chose to spend more time at home, editing his autobiography and sorting through personal papers. While the heavier work of government was carried on by the next generation, he still offered guidance and reflected on a lifetime of achievements. In these later diary entries, his writing turned introspective. He recognized that, although he had faced numerous health ailments, he still retained a spark of vitality that he believed stemmed from his daily movement routines. There was also a spiritual dimension to his perspective. Having been raised in a Puritan environment and later adopting more deist beliefs, Franklin maintained that the human body was a marvelous creation deserving respect and proper care. He felt that small, consistent habits of exercise honored this creation. In one diary note, he wrote, "We groom the horse before we ride it. We oil the wagon's axles before we roll them. Yet too often we ignore the needs of our own limbs and sinews." This I find remarkable indeed. In an era without modern gyms, Franklin's approach to exercise was fundamentally practical. He utilized what was readily available: a chair for support, books, or small stones for added resistance, open windows for fresh air. He was not averse to performing stretches in public if the mood struck him. Stories circulated of Franklin stepping away from a dinner party to loosen his limbs in a hallway, prompting amused stares. If asked, he would simply smile and say, "The body requires its portion of attention." Now, you might recall the question posed earlier about your own small exercise habit. Think again about what simple adjustments you can make in your routine. Perhaps it's choosing to stand up and stretch every hour if you work at a desk, or making time for a short walk after meals. Franklin's life suggests that the key lies in consistency rather than intensity. He believed a little bit of daily activity was far more sustainable and beneficial than sporadic bursts of strenuous effort followed by long periods of inactivity. Returning to the historical context, it's helpful to understand how radical Franklin's emphasis on daily physical motion was at the time. While manual labor and day-to-day chores provided some exercise, the idea of deliberately exercising to preserve health was uncommon among the educated classes. Many upper-class individuals prided themselves on avoiding unnecessary labor. Franklin subverted this notion by treating exercise as a worthy, even intellectually respectable, activity. In conversations with physicians of his day, Franklin often found them intrigued but cautious. Some doctors supported the idea that moderate exercise promoted good circulation and balanced the humors, while others viewed it as an eccentricity. Franklin's diaries show he was unconcerned with their skepticism, relying on his own observations to guide him. He frequently wrote that one must test all theories with the experience of living. This empirical approach, the same that drove his scientific inquiries, underpinned his exercise philosophy. As the American Revolution ended, Franklin returned from France to a new nation. Though in declining health, he served as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 at the age of 81. Observers noted that, despite his ailments, he maintained a certain sharpness. When the days of debate dragged on, Franklin might quietly excuse himself to move about. These short breaks revitalized him, allowing him to rejoin the discourse with renewed focus. Younger delegates sometimes teased him about his ancient calisthenics, but Franklin, never one to miss a witty comeback, would reply, "Should you live to my age, you might be grateful for such trifles." In 1790, Franklin fell gravely ill. Even in his final months, he clung to the habit of at least shifting and stretching in bed. Though he could no longer stand or walk comfortably, he wrote to a friend that the effort maintains a certain dignity for my spirit. Indeed, those around him remarked that, until nearly his last breath, Franklin retained a spark of humor and curiosity, arguably the two traits that had fueled his remarkable life. After Franklin passed away on April 17, 1790, Philadelphia mourned deeply. Thousands attended his funeral, reflecting on his contributions to science, politics, and philosophy. Yet only a handful of close associates knew how seriously he took those small exercises he always recommended. His diaries, locked away for a time with other private documents, would later reveal just how thoroughly he had documented his daily practices. Among those manuscripts was the now famous quote, "I am amazed. A small exercise adds years to life." That line, nestled within pages of reflections on diet, public service, and personal virtue, illuminates a side of Franklin often overlooked. We celebrate him for his wit, inventions, and statecraft, but we might do well to also remember him as a forward-thinking advocate of physical well-being. In many ways, his stance foreshadowed modern research showing that something as modest as regular brisk walking can substantially reduce risks of cardiovascular disease, depression, and cognitive decline. Yet the real surprise, and here is where the twist emerges, is how Franklin linked exercise to the moral and intellectual realms. To him, a body in motion was not just physically healthier, but more attuned to ethical and creative thought. He believed that physical stagnation could breed mental stagnation, while motion could catalyze clarity and moral discernment. In one diary entry, he compared a person who never moves to standing water that grows foul, whereas a person who moves regularly is like a flowing stream that remains fresh. This analogy hints at a broader philosophy of energy flow. If we remain stagnant, we risk growing stale in our ideas, our ethics, and our outlook on life. Conversely, consistent movement fosters renewal, flexibility, and openness. Thus, this small exercise that Franklin insisted upon was as much an exercise for the spirit as it was for the muscles. Let's consider how this integrative view resonates today. Contemporary wellness trends often highlight the mind-body connection, the way mental clarity and emotional stability can be enhanced by physical activity. Terms like runner's high or movement therapy capture the essence of what Franklin intuitively understood. Even in an 18th century setting devoid of modern neuroscience, he grasped the essential truth. The body and mind are interdependent, and nurturing one nurtures the other. In practical terms, Franklin's routine could be adapted easily in the present day. Imagine starting each morning with a 5 to 10-minute gentle stretch or walk. Picture yourself inhaling fresh air by an open window, much like Franklin did with his air baths. Then consider building short movement breaks into your workday, standing, pacing, or flexing your shoulders. Over time, these minor gestures of self-care can accumulate profound benefits, just as Franklin recorded in his diaries. Now, recall the second question we posed. Tomorrow morning, what is one small step you can take to add movement to your day, even if it is just for a few minutes? If you decided on something, such as a short outdoor walk, a quick round of yoga stretches, or even dancing to a favorite song, visualize yourself doing it and note how it might improve your energy and mood. That simple act of planning can help you follow through and experience the same kind of amazement Franklin described. Furthermore, Franklin's diaries teach us the importance of reflection. He meticulously tracked not only his virtues and daily tasks, but also how physical activity influenced his well-being. If you decide to implement a small exercise routine, consider writing a brief note each evening about how you felt that day. Did you notice any shift in productivity, mood, or stress levels? Over weeks or months, these notes can become a personal testimony, much like Franklin's diaries, affirming the value of even the simplest forms of motion. Of course, modern life imposes its own challenges. We have cars, elevators, and digital devices that minimize the need for physical exertion. As a result, sitting has become the default posture for many of us. Yet Franklin's story stands as a reminder that we can actively resist inertia. We might use a standing desk, park a bit farther from the store, or schedule mini breaks to stroll around the block. These are all 21st century equivalents of Franklin's small exercise, reflecting the same principle that incremental movement matters. Another angle to consider is how Franklin's approach complements other healthy habits. He believed in a measured diet, moderate social drinking, intellectual engagement, and a structured daily schedule. Adding small exercise routines seamlessly wove into this balanced lifestyle. For us, this might mean pairing short workouts with conscious eating, mindfulness, or creative pursuits. The more these practices reinforce each other, the stronger and more resilient our overall well-being becomes. In delving so thoroughly into Franklin's diaries, we see a man who was a relentless experimenter, not just in science and politics, but in self-improvement. His willingness to try different strategies, observe the outcomes, and refine his approach exemplifies the spirit of continuous learning. That he found amazement in such a modest discovery, a small exercise adds years to life, reveals how open he was to wonder, even late in his life. This sense of wonder might be the key takeaway. Franklin never became jaded, never took his own health for granted. He remained a student of life's subtleties, gleaning valuable lessons from daily experiences. That mindset, perhaps more than any specific regimen, is what allowed him to harness the power of small exercise. It's an attitude that any of us can adopt, regardless of our occupation or the constraints we face. As we near the conclusion of this narrative, let's recall Franklin's final diary entries. They are sparse, but heartfelt. Among them, references to the frustrations of old age mingle with gratitude for the simple joys he could still experience. Good company, a sharp mind, the satisfaction of reading a well-printed book, and each reference to physical movement, even at that advanced stage, retained a note of reverence. He remained convinced that a life with daily exercise, no matter how mild, was a life enriched. So, if you're reading this with the intention of improving your own health, or simply seeking inspiration from a remarkable historical figure, take heart in Franklin's discovery. You do not need an elaborate fitness plan or expensive equipment. You simply need a willingness to move regularly and observe the results. Let your own diary, be it a journal, a phone app, or a mental log, capture the benefits you notice. Over time, you may find your own amazement at how such a tiny, deliberate practice can ripple through your days. As for the final question we promised, now that you've explored Franklin's journey, can you envision a long-term perspective on how small exercise might transform not just your physical condition, but also your mindset and sense of purpose? If yes, share your thoughts in the comments. If no, consider experimenting and see what unfolds. Franklin's life reminds us that sometimes the biggest leaps come from the smallest steps, those taken regularly, with curiosity and guided by the desire to live fully. And thus, in the diaries of Benjamin Franklin, we find a lesson that transcends the centuries. Small, consistent exercise isn't a chore, it's an invitation. An invitation to longevity, vitality, and ultimately amazement at what the human body and spirit can achieve when nurtured with mindful movement day after day. Let that invitation guide you. And who knows, you may look back years from now and echo Franklin's words, "I am amazed. This small exercise truly adds years to life."